previous meeting. But let's start with the events of the day. So today the president was holding a meeting with the constitutional commissions and independent institutions. Yeah. And in his speech, he went very, very specific to the events of bombers in August last year, and where he was saying the IEBC commissioners were under direct threat. In fact, the chairman, the outgoing chairman, was under threat of kidnap and murder. And he has repeated these over and over and over again. What do you make of what the president is saying? What is he saying?
I think there's no doubt that there was a lot of there were a lot of things happening in Bomas that night, and I think there's also no doubt that there was an attempt to try and change the results, support the will of the people. But I think what the president is trying to demonstrate in all these, repeated assertions on what happened in Bomas is that, his victory, there was an attempt to try and deny him an opportunity to be the ruler in this country or the president in this country. Even, that's the point. I think that everything was done. All, there was an attempt to pull all plugs to try and get him, out of the race one way or the other. But I think what is more important for Kenyans is that this is a very serious issue. When the president states that kind of thing, that is a crime. That is not just a simple crime, but it's a serious crime that demands an investigation. And when people are involved in small crimes, we are taking them to court. This is the kind of crime that needs to be investigated, and people who are involved been taken to. So I think it's not good to simply state that these things happened. And unless you do something, as Chebukati said yesterday, there's a risk that these things will recur again in the future. So I don't know what he plans to do about it, but I think maybe the president has a plan. That's why he keeps repeating.
But then he should come up with a plan. I mean, he should say, oh, this is what the plan is. Or like now, when he was meeting those commissioners, he should have said, we are not going to let this rest. Because remember, this is several months after that incident happened. The 3 commissioners of the IEBC who are remaining are already exiting office. The others were suspended, others resigned. We only have Commissioner Masit who remains as suspended, right? Facing a tribunal. So that matter is gone. We are now going to start recruiting a new commission. If there's no direct conversation and explicit communication from the president that we are going to investigate this.
In this country, there's always, we always hesitate to take action when it involves political leaders. And I think this is probably why the president is hesitating. But see what has happened in Brazil. I mean, when that chaos happened, the president acted immediately. And he demanded so and so, so and so. People were responsible for security. Everyone. And they didn't shy away from accusing the former president of his involvement. But in Kenya, I think there's always been an attempt to avoid, this kind of things when it comes to political dealers. Always because of the simple fact that it could be your next time. The history has been that when it's your turn, you will try and also see how you can use the system or the instruments of power. So I think so. But let us hope, because I think Chebukati made it very clear that in his letter to the president, form a commission of inquiry. So I'm hoping that at some stage the president would probably do something about it. But the way it's being repeated, you would think either he's building up to that, a momentum towards that, or he's trying to probably build that momentum and then later say we have forgiven them or something. But either way, I think it's a matter of concern really when that kind of thing is being mentioned and no action is being taken.
Or use the momentum for something else. Remember, the next phase now is the recruitment of new commissioners to the IEBC. There's already an amended law talking about the selection panel to the IEBC that now changes the constitution of that selection panel, which still brings in more political players and people who have been almost expressly picked by the executive into that selection panel.
when I look at the proposed bill, apparently the changes are not that significant, because the Parliamentary Service Commission will have 2 members.
Yep.
Of course, the party which has the coalition which has the highest number is the ruling coalition. I mean, you can't do anything about it. But the same thing with the political parties, they'll have 1. The other significant players would be the interreligious, which will have 2. And the LSK, which has got 1.
Yep.
I think they generally, the history here is that when you have those kind of institutions, Public Service Commission also has 1. So when you take Public Service Commission and Parliamentary Service Commission and political parties, yes, you get the feeling that the people in power would have some influence in these three institutions. I think that's probably the concern. But again, I mean, you can't do much about it. I mean, you can only use institutions to form that, to select the panel members. You cannot use any
but these institutions, Mheshimiwa, are politician heavy. I mean, is that the right way to go? I've always felt that if you cannot really have independence of the IEBC, if those who picked the IEBC are the players.
In this country, in every IEBC commission that we have had in the last 20 years or so, political parties have always had a role. It has to. That has been one of the common denominators, that we must have political parties. But the argument has been that both sides of the political divide should have an equal opportunity to have representation. But it has not changed much. Look at what happened in the last one. It was largely picked up by the Kenya, the Azimio wing, if you will, the Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga team. At the time, the deputy president and his team were of no significance. But again, when it came to the election, the same IEBC did not play ball the way the other group wanted. So sometimes you may think that it will help you, but clearly I think this is one of the most sensitive institutions. And I think there is need, as has been demonstrated by many speakers today, that there is need for impartiality, because this institution and the way they conduct the election can ban this country. So I think there is need to have that neutrality, that impartiality reflected in the panel itself. That's very important. I think we need to look into that.
And the journey to proper, meaningful electoral reforms, how do we get there? If every time all we talk about is reconstituting the members of the commission, but not looking at the institution and the processes themselves. If the IEBC, for example, in the last 5 years was trying to come to Parliament with proposals on amendment and regulations, and Parliament was just dilly-dallying on them. For example, the proposal on capping campaign financing, which was just thrown out flimsily by members of Parliament. Shall we ever get to proper meaningful
You see,
reforms?
Parliament is a political institution. That's where the politics is played. So if a party is in power and they have more numbers in Parliament, they would try and get institutions or the regulations or the rules or the laws to favor them. This happens even in the US. You look at what happened in the attempt to suppress voters under Trump. They say millions of voters were legally, suppressed for one reason or the other. So, and when this Biden team came in, they try and change the. So this happens when you have the influence of the Parliament. You would obviously want to change the rules of the game so that it can favor you. And this is, unfortunately, the situation here is different. Ours is a country that is a powder cake. It can go into flames because of ethnicity, because politics, the way things are done. So I think there is need, really. This lesson in Bomas should be a very important lesson to the current leadership, that they need to ensure that there is impartiality in this institution, so that we don't have a situation where one faction, an IEBC becomes two factions openly. And I think that would be very unfortunate if we don't. And Kriegler Commission, by the way, after what happened in 2007, we have not implemented even a third of what is in that commission's report.
That's the point.
If we implemented that effectively, we would not be having all these problems. For example, one of the fundamental things is that any change to legislation regarding elections must be done at least, about a year before the election. We have a situation where there's an attempt to amend the rules 3 months, 6 months before elections. So I think really at the end of the day in Kenya, the issue here is the end justifies the means. So we don't mind how the rules are done, but we want to see the end results. So
we must really get there. I mean, we must get to that point where we are actually following the dictates of our laws and the fruits of commissions that have been set in place and a lot of taxpayers' money expended in getting these commissions to work and to produce results, like a Criminal Commission, for example, and the others.
Yeah, it's very important. I mean, and no one has experienced the significance of having an impartial, effective institution, IEBC, than the current leadership. They have seen it. It reached a point where the current president, a few months ago during the campaigns, said, "Look, you guys, you can even have Mr. Oburu Odinga as your chairman. I don't mind whom you put there." It reached that point because he was suspicious. There were suspicions all over that, this institution will be influenced. It reached a point where the team of officials coming into the country, working for IEBC were intercepted and arrested by DCI. It became so dirty. What happened? I mean, so it should be a lesson. And this, they have a single opportunity to rectify this once and for all. And the current leadership really, and put people of integrity. We are not in short supply of people of integrity. We are not in short supply of effective leaders who can really be impartial. And this is what the three commissioners yesterday in their farewell said. Let us have impartial team who can stand the test of this institution really in future. I think that is critical.
And move it forward. Okay. The president has already said he inherited almost empty coffers at the Treasury. He's running a government almost on empty. And yet he has to implement all the programs. He has to commence, implementing the promises that they made during the campaigns of steadying the economy, of changing the lives of Kenyans, of bringing the cost of food down, of doing all those things that require money. One of the things that he immediately said was, I want to see a 300 billion shilling cut in the expenditure of the current budget. Have you felt a reduction in 300 billion shillings spending by government?
Not really. Over the last, I think, decade or so, when you hear the government pledge on austerity measures, it's always really lip service, because what happens is we don't really go to where the crux of the matter is. What we do is we go for the simple things. We look at the transport, we look at travel, we look at training, those simple ones, and say we are going to reduce those ones. But at the end of the day, we don't have the guts to really go the whole way and say, no, let us stop this kind of expenditure. For example, expenditures that would impact on development projects or infrastructure, or even on recurrent. There's huge expenditure. That is, today you've seen the SRC chair saying that wastage is the single largest problem in our budgets. Wastage. So, but we don't look at that. The government is being expanded. You can see the way there's no attempt to try and reduce or rationalize the structure of government. We are expanding. On travel, you have seen we still travel large. And we are living large. In that conference in Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh, on COP27, we had the largest delegation from this country government, nearly 293. And so we there's no attempt. If you really want to even demonstrate on that aspect of travel, look at what Magufuli did. He said, okay, we want to reduce travel expenses, so no traveling. Simple. No traveling for all the years that he was in power. The 2 years or so he was in power. There was no travel by members of parliament, by the executive. It's not essential. If you really look at what happens in public service, you'll always get an invitation, I don't know how many times in a day, for this conference or that conference. And if you don't have that kind of strict whatever, the temptation to travel is there. So I think if you ask Kenyans, is there, I don't think we have seen any significant, and we'll see the numbers later when the control of budget publishes, whether there's actual reduction of the 300 billion. But of course, the government, Treasury has sent out circulars asking, different ministries and institutions to cut down on travel, to cut down on training, to cut down on this. And so I think, by the way, sometimes it becomes possible to do it, not for any reason, but because there is no exchequer release, there's no money.
There's no money
so
at
essentially,
all.
Then you can't even travel. So that happens quite often. That you by default you just have to stop traveling because there's no money for you to travel. And I hope that becomes the situation.
I hope it leads us there.
Yeah.
This is usually a very tough time for government at the beginning of the year, because many of the debt repayments are due in January. Of course, then the government has borrowed in terms of bills and bonds. They are also due around the same time. So a lot of money is spent by government on these repayments, and then it's left with issues of cash flow and cash flow management. Do you get a sense that this new administration is now looking at how best to balance this and make sure that they actually spend right and correct?
No, it's early. You know, this administration has not yet developed any financial or economic policy yet that we can hold against it. The budget that they have now is developed by the previous administration. So in the next few weeks, when the budget papers will be presented to Parliament, we will see all the measures they will probably take in order to address the issue of fiscal deficit. That is the main. When you heard what the CS Treasury said last week, Professor Ndungu, he said we are heading for recession globally. And he cited IMF and World Bank, reports where the World Bank said, look, the global shocks and the highest expenditures by many of the poor countries, including middle-income countries like us, will be on debt servicing. Our money will largely go into debt servicing, and there won't be much money. So what governments are trying to do in this kind of situation, and what the CS said, is we'll focus on fiscal consolidation, where we'll try and reduce the fiscal deficit by collecting more taxes and through austerity measures. This is the kind of thing. But I think I haven't, frankly, seen an attempt to try and effect this. And I see the pain on the face of the CS when he said, look, I have no more headroom. I can't take any more loans, and we have a tough economic situation next year. He said it clearly when he was launching the hearings on the Treasury. But at the same time, you have the executive, his colleagues on the other side, pledging development. The president was just in Nyanza the other day, and and the list of things that
it was presented to him, but he was saying yes.
And so now, with that kind of when you go with those wish lists, you want to do all this, then it flies in the face of all these measures that the CS has said. I think things are going to be pretty difficult for next year, and this is why you see the president focusing on the issue of revenue, and I think, in my view, it's misplaced. I think it's misplaced. What the CS has said is clearly that the focus should be on, if you want to address the fiscal deficit, the focus should be on spending.
On expenditure.
Yes, you need to cut down spending. Yep, that's what I think we need to focus
Here's the
on.
thing, though, as we talk about all these, it's time for austerity, it's time for tightening our belts and all indications are that the National Treasury is going to Parliament with budget estimates for the next financial year going beyond 3.6 trillion shillings. Is 3.6 trillion shilling budget an austerity budget?
No, and that's where the problem is. You see, this is what happened under Uhuru administration. That we are going to generate more revenue because we have invested in infrastructure. That was the argument. We have invested, and so revenue will expand, and so we'll have more money. And so they went for huge budgets. The consequences was we ended up borrowing, and this is the risk that this government runs. You come up with a budget of 3-4 trillion, and the revenues do not come in. You'll be forced to go to borrowing, and it's clear that that's going to happen, because look at the tax situation. This year, 2022-23, the tax target is 2.07 trillion. The figures published just a few days ago by Treasury, by KRA, we have missed the target for July to November, the first 5 months of this year, by 32 billion. Their target of 818 billion, they only managed 786 billion. It's already down. If you look at it, then it means going forward for the remaining 7 months, there's likelihood that KRA might lose the target by another 100 billion. So if you cannot achieve the 2 trillion today, how is it possible for you to target 3 trillion, next year? When you are warning, your CS is warning next year is going to be bad news. We are likely to head for recession. And that is the situation globally. It's the warning everywhere that, look, next year, many countries are already going into recession in Europe. So in my view, really, this is not going to be very realistic to achieve all that target. I think what the government needs to do is to cut down its expenditure. You must live within your means. I don't think we can. This is what put us where we are.
We must pause.
We must, yes,
and look back.
Correct.
Is it also about time to renegotiate some of our debts?
You see, our status now, when we were in LDC, the least developed countries, we would do that, and we'll get a debt relief and all those things. With the kind of GDP that the Uhuru administration, through rebasing of our GDP, we ended up in a situation where we are in a low middle income country, and you can't automatically get some of those benefits, but you have to. I don't see a situation where we can continue to service. We will need 1.3 trillion to service debt this year. Out of 2 trillion that you're collecting, is not going to be practical, and I think the government needs to focus on that. But it's not clear. I have seen every single month since they took power, this administration has borrowed money. They borrowed money. There's borrowing that either from World Bank or IMF or Korea, or we've been collecting money, and so I don't know. You tell Treasury, says no, look guys, we're stuck, but the executive is still having the appetite for a little more
doing things
because you have to meet your pledges.
Let's take a short break. This is Newsline on KTN News. My name is Eric Latif. My guest is the Honorable Bill Okero, former Mandera Senator and also a former Shadow Finance Minister. We'll shortly be joined by Kuria Kimani, who is the MP for Molo constituency and also the Chairman of the Finance and National Planning Committee of the National Assembly. He is the man who is going to be spearheading conversation about taxation for the next financial year and the others to come in this administration. Keep it here for that. We are taking a quick break. We'll be back shortly.
Apart from improving yields of the crops, manure is also a source of income.
This is where I bring you diverse farming stories from across the country that get to show you what is happening on the ground in the farming sector.
What does it take for this plant to grow the way it has?
In cherry tomatoes is not that rocket science.
The main challenge of this business is consistency of supply.
Lengo letu la kuanzisha kikundi hiki ilikuwa ni kubuni ajira na kuondoa umaskini kati yetu.
Stay tuned to Youth in Agriculture right here on KTN News.
Apart from improving yields of the crops, manure is also a source of income.
This is where I bring you diverse farming stories from across the country that get to show you what is happening on the ground in the farming sector.
What does it take for this plant to grow the way it has?
In cherry tomatoes is not that rocket science.
The main challenge of this business is consistency of supply.
Lengo letu la kuanzisha kikundi hiki ilikuwa ni kubuni ajira na kuondoa umaskini kati yetu.
Stay tuned to Youth in Agriculture right here on KTN News.
Welcome back. The conversation continues on Newsline this evening. It's Bill Okero, former Mandera Senator and the former Shadow Finance Minister, and Kuria Kimani, the MP for Molo Constituency, Chairman of the Finance and National Planning Committee of the National Assembly. Mheshimiwa Kuria, welcome to the conversation. I'm sure you had a bit of what we were talking about before we took the break with the Honorable Bill Okero. We're talking about what we expect. Already, the National Treasury, through the CS, has told us people expect a tough year ahead. Shortly, we'll be seeing the supplementary budget coming to Parliament, but also now we'll be seeing the budget policy statements being brought to Parliament, with the National Treasury saying what they hope to do with the expenditure for the next financial year. You'll be on the other side, where you'll be expecting to see how to raise money to fund that budget. And we have been talking about an austerity budget. Already the president, among the first things he said is, people, it's going to be tough, let's all buckle up. The budget that we are anticipating to see with the budget policy statement coming to Parliament is in excess of 3.6 trillion shillings. Is that austerity, Mheshimiwa?
First of all, Latif, thank you for having me. And I think I've joined in at the, when we started the conversation. But when you work under the William Samoei Ruto government, you have to wake up very early, and you must be ready to work throughout the day, and sometimes almost throughout the night, because the expectations he places on us and the controls to make sure that all of us have to be accountable to the people that elected us. And every time he doesn't, he's always reminding us of the promises we made to the people, about the plight of the people and the expectations the people have over us. Having said that, if you remember, one of the statements that the president made in his inaugural speech at his swearing in Kasarani was, we had to cut down the government spending by 300 billion, the austerity measures for 300 billion. And some people thought it's not possible, it's not, it's not possible. And I think what the president then seemed to have been doing, especially considering that he had been cut off the running of government for quite some time, was throwing a controlled experiment. So if we asked you to cut budget by 300 billion, can you do it? And you see, we have seen that cut of 300 billion shillings and with more or less safe and fluid offering of government services. So it actually therefore shows that some government ministries or state departments did not actually need the 300 billion shillings that they got cut from in the first place. And again, look at the policy decisions that he is making. What we're going to see in the next few weeks is a recruitment of 30,000 teachers. It's going to cost us a lot of money in terms of the government extent, in terms of the budget. But what is the ripple effect of the recruitment of teachers? That this is not just any other government spending. This is a government spending that will remove 30,000 Kenyans from the unemployment bracket. But in addition, this is a government initiative that will bring 30,000 Kenyans to the tax bracket. So you're not just solving the expenditure side. We're not just increasing expenditure for the government, but you're directly increasing tax collection by 30,000 new taxpayers being added to the tax bracket through PAYE. You could expedite that factor and that further and consider the multi-apply effect of it. You're going to have 30,000 more Kenyans being deployed across the country. And no, not if you get a job in Molo, you'll have to rent a house. So and we're telling Karen on the other side that you don't just have to rely on the people that are coming to you and telling you that they're landlords. We're going to use data in terms of land rates, in terms of legislation of title deeds, to find out who are these people that own these apartments. So if you own a renting an apartment that generates rental income in Molo, when we employ those teachers and come and rent your place, we'll come for you. because you're supposed to pay your rightful share of rental income. So we are finding government initiatives that don't just increase government expenditure, but most importantly, lead to increase in government revenue through netting poor people into the tax bracket. We're also using a different approach. Previously, it was about intimidation. It was weaponization of government agencies, especially the Kenya Revenue Authority, when you're not able to pay your taxes. You were saying, fine, it's okay. You think you can't pay your equitable share of tax? Fine, let's come to your business. Okay, you can't pay 10 million. Fine, but can you? But according to us, according to this survey, and according to the analysis they're doing, you're able to pay 3 million shillings per month. So as a result, then the Kenya Revenue Authority is able to get 3 million shillings of income every month from you. A decision that previously would have meant that you close down your business. So we don't just lose all the other taxes that comes with closing a business. For example, payee, withholding tax, VAT, and excess, and none of those others. But you also lose the 3 billion that you could raise in the hope of getting the 10 million shillings. If you listen to the president last week, he said, we are done with waivers because the small man and the big, the small boys and the big boys must be treated equally when it comes to payment of taxes. And let me tell you that if all of us, if all corporates, if all business enterprises paid their rightful share of tax, then we wouldn't have to overtax Kenyans, we wouldn't have to borrow. If only everyone paid their rightful share of taxes. But what is happening is, we've had you and I that have to pay payee, and everyone that buys consumables that have to pay VAT, and everyone that buys consumables that have to pay excise, and every small business person that has to pay withholding tax has to pay. But when it comes, for example, to corporate tax on all these are national taxes, or big taxes, then there becomes a conversation about waivers. And then you come and say, no, I know you 1 billion, but can we waive 500 million shillings? But that security officer employed to guard your building, who pays 5,000 shillings a tax, still pays the rightful share of the tax, 5,000 shillings, irrespective of the economic situation of this country. And so it's about how do we make sure that we bring everybody on board to pay the rightful share of tax. And secondly, on the expenditure side of the government, it's not just stopping government expenditure, but how do we make sure that the government spending that we do leads to a better macro and microeconomic policies for this country, and also leads to more collection of taxes for this republic. Okay. If you notice, Latif, as I give the last example, even in terms of the contracting that we did in the last regime, one of the silent clauses was that you had a Chinese building the railway going to Mombasa, but part of the conversation that there was at the negotiation was that they were able to bring in the raw materials and the equipment tax-free. So yes, we ended up with the railway, but we would have collected a lot of taxes if those, first of all, materials were acquired locally, and we are able to get the correct amount of tax from those transactions. But we lost on the tax. We were poor in the negotiation of the terms of that contract, and therefore, even when that project should spur economic growth for the country, we are losing greatly because we are losing on revenues that should have correct in terms of taxes. We're supposed to do the Nairobi-Mau Summit dual carriage. It was supposed to be done at 1 billion shillings per kilometer. And so the president said, no. There is no way that you can make 1 billion shillings of tarmac, there's no way you can build a road at 1 billion shillings a kilometer, unless you're making like 3 stories, or maybe 4 of that road. And says, no, if this contract by the Chinese government has to continue, you have to renegotiate the terms. We have to renegotiate the pricing. We have to renegotiate how we collect revenue and how we know how much revenue we've collected, especially because it was a public partnership concept that was supposed to be repaid through the toll collections on the highway. And if you're not satisfied by these reasons, then we are sorry, we cannot go on with this contract.
So you've told us very many things, and that forms the basis for the conversation that we continue with. Starting with the first one, I think I'm just going to throw in the first one. The 300 billion shillings expenditure cuts that you're saying are already being implemented in government. How?
There were a lot of expenditures are not, if you remember, I'd rather quote the president's words and when he went for that leaders retreat in Nanyuki said, if you can send an email, instead of sending a letter, then avoid the letter, send the email. What was the president saying? As a result, you are avoiding all the printing work that's done by ministries. I would say that I think
so. That was 2 weeks ago. So is there 300 billion shillings cut?
There certainly is a 300 billion shillings cut.
Expenditure by government.
100%.
Do you feel it?
You see, the 300 billion will have to be for the remaining part of the year.
Yeah.
Financial year, we have got another 4 or 5 months to go.
5 months to go.
So when we get the expenditure reports from Treasury, then we can say yes. This is, and we get the outlook. We get the report from Treasury later when they are doing the budget for next year. Then we'll have the report saying that yes, last year our budget was 3.3 trillion, but we actually spent only 3. We have reduced to 300, and this is how. But right now, I think, apart from the circulars that have been sent out and the decision and the commitment and so forth, I don't think it's the figures that you can actually present to Parliament. To actually indicate how much has been deducted,
but that, as an insider, I will tell you, there are reports that we get to receive every time, because you don't have to wait until the end of the year to know whether a State Department or Parastatal has exceeded their budget or not. Those quarterly reports have actually shown a reduction in the spending. And remember also, even most of the state officers, are also looking at, some of these officials are on what you call performance contracting.
Yeah.
And part of the way the appraisal is going to be done at the end of the financial year is how well, they utilize the budget in line with the government directives. And so if I'm a CEO of Parastatal and I know that by now I should be at 60%, I'll be very careful not to get at 80% or 90% unless I really have to. And if I really have to get that, then I would have to get authority from my supervisor or from someone saying that I am. And again, as Bello said, we are going to see the real publication of those reports at the end of the financial year. But I can tell you, as the chair of Finance and National Planning Committee, that actually our state departments, our process are actually implementing the austerity measures of the cut of 300 billion shillings, because after that there was a circular that was done by Treasury saying that now for us to achieve this 300 billion shillings austerity measures, that the cuts will have to be in the following areas. And there was a circular that went to each State Department and each Parastatal telling them that they have to cut their budgets by this much. And again, when rubber meets the road, when we are looking at the reviews of the financial reports, then we'll be able to ascertain for sure how much that was done and how exactly it was done.
You see, what is important here is the policy direction.
Yeah.
If the current year's budget of 3 trillion is difficult to implement because of the revenue flows, how come then, as you said earlier, that the next one you are planning 3.6 trillion? Clearly, there's a bit of contradiction in my view in that, because if you can't even raise the revenue.
If you can't make ugali today, how can you budget to make ugali and chapati tomorrow?
And clearly, if you look at the reports of KRA last week, for the 5 months to July to November, which were published, they've already below target by over 30 billion. And so for me, really, and this country, by the way, and I've published this many times, it has the highest revenue per GDP collection in Africa, one of the highest, more than South Africa, more than Egypt, more than even countries like Ghana and so forth. So it's not that we are not paying. This country, people are paying revenue. Our challenge is not in revenue, and this is what Uhuru missed, and this is what this administration risks missing again if they focus on revenue and not on expenditure. The issue is on expenditure. We are losing money through inflated contracts, we are losing money through corruption, we are losing money through wastage, which was discussed today, I think, in the commission meeting. We are losing money through, structures of government that are not rationalized, which are expanding, and so on and so forth. So I think, for me, those areas need to be targeted, and those are the things that you need to focus on. Expenditures, reduce expenditures. But to say we want only revenue collection, that Kenyans are not paying taxes.
So let's look for
I think generally, when there is a recession, when the economy is bad, the best thing to do world over is to first grow the economy, because an economy that is going down cannot generate more revenue. I mean, it doesn't. I mean, you are asking people whose performance is getting companies. I'm in business, and so when businesses and the demand is low, people have no money. There are many of the companies in my industry, they're operating at less than 50% capacity because of problems of demand. So when you ask now, people pay more taxes. In that situation, I think the best thing would have been what they said in the bottom-up transformation agenda. There, the agenda was very clear. We'll turn around the economy, and they gave those 6 areas that will turn around: the agri-businesses, the SMEs, the healthcare, housing, and all those things. When you turn around the economy, you will get the money, the 3.whatever trillion. But I think it's putting the cart before the horse if we say, I need the money now to do the economy.
On, how
I don't know,
raising the revenue targets over and over and over again.
This is the way I see it.
You can't spend what you don't have. And
you'll end up borrowing if you do that. That's what we've been doing.
If you spend money that you don't have, as Bello is saying, that you end up borrowing.
Correct. That's the risk here.
And then the borrowing now has a whole ripple effect. Interest expenditure. We're talking about even just the love of the people for their country. Like if you're overburdening you and your children's children, next generation with taxes, with debt, how ready are you then to honor your obligations to tax? Not just that, but in terms of giving positive contribution to the country. And I think that's where we were. Our rate of patriotism, how much we love our country, how much we want our government to succeed, how much we were optimistic as a country, had really gone down. And actually, that's one of the biggest unstudied effects of acquiring national debt. So it's actually a very...
Answer that question directly. Austerity versus an increasing budget. How do you justify those two? How do you rationalize the fact that we are talking austerity? We are talking about a clearly demonstrated reduction in our capacity to generate the revenue that we had budgeted, and yet we're coming up with higher budgets.
You'd ask yourself, where are we cutting in terms of the austerity measures? And 2, where is the high budget going? The reason why we are at a problem, for example, is because of the unemployment rate is one of our highest in the last few years. And so if we increase revenue collection, and we target that revenue collection in the budget to ways that solve the issues that are making us in the first place worse off as a country, then naturally and economically then we move forward. And I've given you a very good example. If we're able to take out 30,000 unemployed people out of unemployment through the recruitment of teachers, and when it comes down to the police recruitment, then we're able again to absorb another 20 or 30,000. We're able to create employment. We're going to increase the fluid of the velocity of money in the economy. And over and above that, the initial problem that we had of our revenue collection, we're able to solve it because we're able to absorb more people into the tax net, not by forcing them to pay for what they don't have, but by giving them a gainful income to what they have. And again, the ripple effect of that is that if you build an apartment flat, if you build an apartment below, and you have tenants for that apartment, then you actually get to gain income. If I started a small business, the demand that my friend is talking about, then you have a demand for the products and services of that business that they've therefore created. Thanks to the employment and the intervention factors that the government has done. The challenge is when that money is either collected in whichever way, whether through revenue, increased revenue generation from the country, or through debt, and goes to people's pocket, quote unquote, the 2 billion shillings daily that was being lost. Or two, when that money is collected and is spent on exaggerated contracts. Or three, where that money is collected but is kept on projects whose gainfulness in terms of economic growth or direct impact to the community is so overstretched over the years that doesn't provide a short-term solution to our issues. So again, it's a very tricky balance to achieve.
What I'm hearing you say is that you're acknowledging that even the current budget is a bloated budget, which allows for all those leakages where we are losing money through budgeted corruption and all those things, where money that should have been spent for meaningful projects is actually not being spent. No. So instead of rationalizing and sealing those loopholes, you're just increasing the budget and saying all you're going to spend it on is more salaries, recurrent expenditure and all.
That's not what I said. My point is, we are working on a very tight rope. If you study economics properly, you know that actually, when you reduce government expenditure, you risk reducing economic growth, because you need government expenditure to spur economic growth. But what I am saying that our government is trying to do is, where are we targeting that expenditure? And I'm saying in the past, that expenditure have been targeted on projects that were meant to enrich people's project more than the functions. But what I see in the new budget, in the new regime, in the new policy direction of this government, is having projects that are from the onset not just made to make sure that there's provision of water when you're doing a dam, but in terms of making sure that that dam benefits the people at the least cost possible, and has also a way of making sure that it regenerates money back into the economy to spur economic growth, to increase disposable income of the residents, and therefore, increase the velocity of cash flow in the economy.
There is no doubt, I agree with Mheshimiwa, there's no doubt that the government is trying to look at this thing differently. You go for, if you look at the Hustler Fund, if you look at the attempt by the government to use the jobless youth for the housing projects, the recruitment of teachers and so forth, that attempt to create job creation, because that is the issue. Job creation is the issue. But I think what we are saying is that, to take that argument, its logical conclusion, what you're saying is that if the government wants to collect more taxes, we should employ more people. Employ 1 million civil servants. They'll pay taxes. But I think generally, when you look at the way the government's manifesto is, the issue of job creation was supposed to come in from the an inclusive growth of the economy on those areas which I have mentioned earlier, agriculture and those things. Those are the ones that should generate more revenue for government.
Not by government hiring farmers.
I think it's a good thing that the government, instead of going for those huge infrastructure projects, for the moment at least, we will not know what will be in the budget.
There's a huge one. There's a mega dam.
But if they go and give, those on teachers and on job loss, that is a good thing. But I think there is need to address fundamentally the issues that can help in the growth of businesses. Because if the businesses expand, they recruit more people and they pay more taxes. I think that is the focus on, the government is not interchangeable with the economy. Economy is wider than government. The government is a major player in the economy, yes. I mean, in terms of it's not synonymous. I mean, there is the whole sector of the private sector and other, who are outside government, which generate all the taxes collected mostly by KRA is mostly from businesses. And I think that is what I'm saying, that, look, it's fine, you are recruiting and you're addressing those low income or jobless people, but I think there's need to also address generally the business environment, so that people can expand. Things are tough. The economy is in bad shape. You people have said it. But I think to ask for 3.6 trillion, 4 trillion, before the economy shows signs of rebounding or growth, World Bank what CS Ndungu said last week, has revised downwards from 3.5 to 2.7. The average growth for the economy globally, it's going down. The situation, because they are saying prepare for recession. Ndungu has said prepare for recession. And so in that environment, to expect to collect another 1 trillion or something equivalent in taxes, I find that to be a bit of a it will be a burden, and I think that's why I said it's not probably the...
Let's move into that phase then, actually, Mheshimiwa Kuria. You will be looking at how to finance a 3.6 trillion shilling budget in the next financial year. What should we expect? Is it higher taxes?
Latif, we're trying to achieve a balance between making sure that we create a conducive, affordable, attractive business environment, but at the same time ensuring that everyone pays the rightful share of taxes. And again, it's a very tricky, and I said we are working on a tightrope. But because I'm confident we'll get this right, once we get this right, then we'll have fixed the issue of external and internal debt completely. Why am I saying this? We have a lot of people that pay their rightful share of taxes. And I'm not tired to give this example. In one employed, a security officer employed to guard the Standard Group or whatever else they're employed to. As long as they're employed, the first document they're supposed to submit is their PIN certificate for their pay. So that person earning that almost minimum pay actually gets to pay their rightful share of tax. And we'll compare with somebody who runs tuba business in Gekomba, who sells clothes worth 5,000 shillings every day. Out of that, around 3,000 shillings is profit. In a month, that's 90,000 shillings. Does that person pay his rightful share of tax? Or that person who starts a kinyozi or a salon or a hotel business in the estate, or even that person who sells building materials and turns over 10 million shillings every day, are they paying the rightful share of tax? So once we are able to net everyone that should pay their rightful share, and I'm talking about their, not excess, not 1 shilling more, not 1 shilling less. If we get everybody to pay their rightful share of taxes, the same way we are getting everyone on payee, the same way we are getting everyone on value tax, the same way we are getting the registered audited companies paying the rightful share of...
So it's widening the tax bracket.
It's widening the tax bracket.
I hear talking about minimum tax and turnover tax.
I'm not talking about minimum tax. That's what I'm saying. Don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about minimum tax. I'm talking about if everybody, the obedience, the accuracy in which someone who pays pay when they earn 40,000 shillings, so if we would have the same accuracy.
How do you get that?
Of course, the government is trying to raise tax any which way they can, but some things have to be practical. If you are on salary, yes, if you are above the 24,000, 25,000 minimum pay, then you start paying taxes. But when you are in business, the government has tried through the presumptive tax and so forth to try and address small businesses. But generally, I think after COVID, many of the countries, including in developed countries, there has been an attempt to try and exclude small business from some of these taxes because small businesses are struggling. I can tell you about my turnover, but that turnover may not necessarily result in some profit in my pocket. I am a small business. I made 5 million sales in my salon. But because of the expenses of things, what I think the government needs to take into account is that the cost of doing business has really gone up in the last 2 or 3 years because all the factors that are involved in production has increased. The cost of fuel is up, the cost of inputs, everything that is being imported in this country, globally has gone up because of the other external shocks that we have been talking about. So the cost of production, that's why we risk being not competitive in this region. This is why you find everything coming in, including food, eggs, tomatoes coming in from Tanzania and Uganda. We have ceased to be, and the more you tax the more companies will flee this country. In the last decade, several major multinational companies have left Kenya. And I think I've written on this several times. And one of the reasons why they gave is because of the high taxes. And they are going where? They are going to Egypt, they are going to Uganda, they are going to South Africa, countries where the taxes are, corporation taxes are lower. Corporation taxes are lower. But the cost of doing business is much lower than Kenya. For example, energy. If you are in Egypt, the cost of energy is pretty low. In South Africa, it's much more lower than this. So when you add now tax burden onto that, so I think there has to be a sense in which government should be very careful. Tax does not mean that government has a right to tax people. No, government taxes people to the extent that legislature, the people's representatives, allow it. And you must have that balance. People need to have some disposable income in their pocket. Government needs to also have some money to run some services. Because if I was this government, I would leave my budget at the 3 trillion of last year because of the situation in which the economy is. What I would focus on is how to cut down on unnecessary expenditure, the way they have done in this austerity measures, and wait for the economy to rebound, to grow. Then you can think of now raising more money.
Now you can raise.
But if you say, unless I spend, there will be no revenue, because government is not the only source of. Government provides stimulus in the economy, yes, by spending, but government is not the only source of economic growth. Most of the economy, if you look at all the sectors that contribute to economic growth in a year when they're published, the public sector is a small portion. There are many sectors. For example, if you look at the telecommunications sector, the finance sector, many sectors in this country that generate significant. Others are dying off. Like agriculture has lost substantially because exports have decreased. Areas like tourism, we have lost because of post-COVID and so forth. So, but this part of those sectors of the economy are the ones that generate the growth and then generate more revenue. Yeah. So, but if we say let us focus on government must spend in order to get more tax. I think then it's putting the chicken before the or putting the cat before the horse.
Mheshimiwa, could you respond to this as we conclude, as you make your closing remarks as well?
Latif, and I'm talking about this as also one of the things I do on the side is farming, and one of the farmings I do is poultry farming. And I think today or yesterday, the Cabinet Secretary for Agriculture made a statement that could be easily interpreted as controversial. Because someone asked, the cost of an egg has risen to around 21 shillings. I wish I could sell the eggs in my farm at 21 shillings because I'm selling them at 12 shillings. But I really wish I can sell them at 21.
Yeah.
And so the question was, the person who asked that question was from the perspective of, why have you allowed the cost of an egg to go to as high as 20 shillings per egg? And then the Cabinet Secretary responded and said, now, are you complaining? It means better revenues for the farmer. So how are you looking at this equation? If you look at the egg price from the farmer's perspective, then it's absolutely good for the farmer. If you look at the eggs price from the perspective of you who doesn't do any farming, then it's an additional cost to you. In conclusion, therefore, I'll say, like the price of the egg, the test of our government is how do we make sure that the farmer collects 30 shillings for each egg, but the person who buying that egg is able to afford the 30 shillings for that egg that the farmer is selling it. That way, the farmer shall be happy and the consumer shall be happy. And that way, we'll have solved the paradox and achieved the equilibrium that we need to spur this country forward.
You see, if you look at what
we concluded there, the director tells me we have overshot the time by a couple of minutes. An interesting conversation ends this way, but we concluded that we continue, of course, as the budgeting cycle now kicks in and comes into Parliament for the full gear. We'll have this conversation again and again and again, interrogate the budget policy statement, interrogate the finance bill, and see where we are heading as a country. As Professor Njogona Ndongo has told us, Let's brace for some tough times. But we are in this country together, so we must all have these conversations, all of us together. It's our duty as citizens. I thank you very much for watching Newsline tonight. My name is Eric Latif. My guests have been the Honorable Bill Okero, former Senator for Mandera County and a former Shadow Finance Minister, and the Honorable Kuria Kimani, who is the current MP for Molo. The first time the people of Molo have elected somebody back to Parliament after 30 years. And he's also the chairman of the National Assembly Committee on Finance and National Planning. Have a good evening. Enjoy the rest of your evening.